Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm joined today by Alena from the Soul Mama Hub. We actually found each other via Instagram, so welcome.
Thank you so much, Leonie. It's so great to be here.
So good to have you on. Another podcaster as well. So Alena actually has her own podcast, Unboxable, which is inspo for mums with big dreams. So I love that. She's a mentor for mothers and fundamentally everything from her Instagram to essentially her mission these days is really in supporting mothers. Now, Alena, for your benefit, our podcast is Parenthood, i.e. for both mums and dads, even though we do probably have yeah, we do have a bit more of a heavy listenership on the mum front, but we certainly don't like to isolate our dads as well. But yeah, similar sort of mission in trying to support us parents. So yeah, I love that. What I actually got Alena on for today is to help around the discussion a topic that's actually quite taboo. And this is what I love discussing, things that other people just aren't talking about. And it is around sort of addiction, particularly in early parenting. So this particular caller actually DM'd me, and this is what they actually said. So I'm a new mum and I'm really struggling. I find it so overwhelming on most days, and all I want to do at the end of the day is pour myself a wine to unwind and relax. I've noticed myself drinking more and more to the point where I think it's becoming excessive. I feel too ashamed to tell my partner or any of my friends in fear of judgment. So I hide it from them. I feel like I'm slowly slipping a bit into a dark hole and feel incredibly lonely. Is this normal? So look, a pretty raw confession here. And, you know, first and foremost, thank you for that person who called in. It's not easy to be sort of sharing an aspect of your life that you may not feel overly proud about. So I really appreciate that because I know there will be other people out there who may have similar sort of experiences. So Alena, I want you to start off. Please tell us a little bit about your experience in the early parenting years and your experience with addiction.
Yes, certainly. So I entered into motherhood age 31 and I was living with my partner at the time. And we were in what I would now term an abusive relationship. I didn't at the time. And we were also, certainly I was struggling with active addiction. So what that meant is that during the period of my pregnancy and the first 2 years of my parenting, I was really struggling. And I actually think this is more common than a lot of people realize, especially in motherhood, for women to be battling with substances of all different types. Some of them can be prescribed, and it is so taboo, as you say, and I love that we're talking about it. I'm like you, I think it's really important to shine a light on it. And my experience was just that I really always believed that being a mother would cure me of the adverse effects of early life trauma or self-medicating trauma, which I was doing with my addiction. And there's a man called Gabor Mate who talks a lot about this, about the link between early life trauma and drug and alcohol usage. And, that link is firmly established now. So I guess the first thing I had to do was understand why I was in addiction and really forgive myself for, I guess, not just immediately being healed magically when I had a baby, which is what I thought would happen. I genuinely thought for years and years, as you do, when you're in addiction, there's a high level of denial, And what's really beautiful about this person that has contacted you is that they are confronting that denial and showing some awareness, which is really the first step. So
Absolutely.
my experience day to day it's a real struggle. I struggled with housing. I struggled with intimate relationships with my partner, which I think I was single from when my son was 4 months old. We couldn't maintain our relationship. I was evicted, the story goes on, but day to day, it was just that I just couldn't wait to numb out. I couldn't wait to have a break, which makes you a very non-present parent and then brings a lot of guilt and shame.
Absolutely. I'm not sure how open you are sort of in discussing this, but and if you, please share as much as you feel you would
Sure.
like. But around the addiction piece, sometimes it's helpful to at least even get a bit of perspective, I guess, particularly for those of us who might sit there going, oh, well, I like to have a, vino at the
Yeah.
end of the day. And maybe sometimes my husband and I will drink a bottle of wine on a
Yeah.
Monday, So I wonder from, from your perspective, perhaps, where did you start seeing it becoming dangerous and unproductive? And therefore it goes from, I enjoy, call it, I don't know what your thing of choice was, whether it was a
Yeah.
drug or alcohol, whatever that
Yeah.
looked like, that I'm enjoying that recreationally to
Yes.
actually this is becoming problematic.
Look, I think, and I am open about, I ended up attending a 12-step program for 5 years and was completely sober, and that was a really powerful experience. So there's a few layers I can answer that from. I think typically lots of people self-medicate in ways that are very typical and functional, and it's not a big deal, and it's very personal. But I would say once it starts to affect your relationships, it starts to affect your ability to function in a job or pay your rent, or if you are choosing solo drug or alcohol usage over contact with those you love, that's a big red flag. Also, I feel like there's a lot of internal shifts. When you're in an active addiction, you don't like yourself very much. There's a lot of guilt and shame involved, typically. So I'm not an expert on addiction, but in my experience, I would say that that was the real killer. That was the bit that my self-worth was just at an all-time low. And that meant that I would tolerate things in my life that were so unhealthy, relationships, situations, and all money, energy, everything would go towards the drug of choice, whether that's alcohol or more illegal substances. I think that's a big red flag. So, and alcohol is a drug, it's just a legal drug.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So what I found in my experience with early parenting, well, I actually had prenatal depression and postnatal depression, which was the reason why I started the podcast. I had it both times around for both of my children. They're only 18 months apart in age. So
I'm sorry,
that
honey.
was, yeah, thank you. That was quite a confronting couple of years. And I do agree that, I mean, a lot of the stuff from your childhood or from your life pre-children really that you haven't dealt with perhaps, or, traumas and things like that sort of do creep up, definitely, when you have your children. So yeah, it's not a fix for all of those out there who don't have kids listening. Kids are not a fix for anything, let me tell you. But one thing I feel, and this might sound a little bit ignorant, but I breastfed my children. So I was, for example, if I was feeling like I was in a massive slump, ordinarily preached kids, I'd go get a vino and I'd have a glass and I'd feel better. But because I was breastfeeding, I was so much more mindful of what I was consuming. And so in a
Certainly.
way, it was a little bit more of a blessing in disguise because I couldn't, reach for that. I had to find other ways to kind, maybe eat chocolate or something or whatever it looked like to sort of numb the sensations that I was feeling. So I was curious your thoughts. I guess it depends whether you're, for example, breastfeeding or if you're not, or, what
Sure.
that looks like. But regardless, as parents, we have a level of responsibility to keep this little child alive. So what do
Yes.
you think when it comes to addiction, particularly in early parenting,
Yes.
what does that look like? Like, what did that look like for you, knowing you also had responsibilities on the daily?
Yeah, it was really, when I look back, I'm amazed that I managed it. There's a level of genius involved. And it's really strange. You get very, very creative. So I would seek a lot of time on my own so that I could do what I wanted to do without affecting my child, or I would make sure that they were safe. That was always a priority for me. I was always cognizant enough and responsible enough. I'd say most of the time, I'd say 99% of the time, my child was my priority, and that remains so. It just made me more crafty in my usage of the numbing agents. And I was lucky in the sense that I wasn't using opiates, which can be extremely dangerous in that sense. There are some drugs you can't do that with, right? You can't be around kids at all. And so it was a very strange time. It was a strange time where I was sort of split in two. I was breastfeeding also. I was being as present because I'm a naturally soulful parent. That's what I talk about now in my work, soulful parenting. And I wanted so much to be there for my child. But at that point in time in early motherhood, I just couldn't. And I think it's that thing about when you have a new baby, it's not only the day-to-day situation of having a new baby that you're dealing with, you're also dealing with matrescence, the process of becoming a mother. And that is not always well supported in our communities. And we're often very much left to our own devices without any rites of passage or any real acknowledgement of this incredible shift in our identity. And that's where a lot of depletion and sometimes depression can seed. They're two very different things, mind you, I would say. But it can really be a part of our cultural and social lackings, you know. So day to day, I was alone. I was scared and unsupported. I was going through heartbreak. I was unhealthy. I lost a lot of weight. I looked, you know, a shell of my former self. A lot of my early life traumas were being activated because I was also a child of a very early single parent and put into care at the age of 4 weeks. So a lot of my own early life traumas were being activated. I didn't know that at the time. So there was a lot of layers. But day to day, it was just hand to mouth. It was survival. It was, you know, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to get food on the table? How am I going to make it through the day? It was really severe, you know.
Were you juggling work at the same time, or was it
I
predominantly?
wasn't. Yeah. I wasn't really able to work, and I hadn't really been able to work for some time because of my addiction. I had semi-held down jobs here and there, you know, but couldn't really long term. And that's that thing about relationships. I couldn't really maintain healthy relationships with anybody. So it culminated, and I don't know if you're about to ask this question, but it culminated in a kind of a situation where my son was, I think, just pre 2 years old, and I had no childcare. There's a big childcare crisis at that time as well. It's a long time ago. He's 19 now. So at that point, childcare places were like hen's teeth, and they were very expensive, and it was the beginning of the childcare crisis. So even if I'd wanted to work, it would have been extremely difficult. So I had no job, no place to live. I was living at a friend of a friend's house in their spare room with all of my belongings piled up around me and my little boy with me every day, and no real family support. I was pretty alien. I mean, I won't say no support. I had really jeopardized my relationship with them. They absolutely loved me and supported me. But at that point, I was kind of unsupportable. And so there I was, and I got chucked out of the house I was like squatting in, basically couch surfing in, because someone in there had a psychotic episode and threw all my belongings on the road. And so I got this phone call, you better come back. You know, he's thrown all your stuff on the road. We knew he was in a bit of trouble. And then there I was, all of my belongings in the middle of the road. It was quite a symbolic moment, really. And so I put all of that back under cover, and I couldn't stay there anymore, and I was homeless, you know. So I found myself with nowhere to go, no real money. I had a car, and I just kind of drove around, and I had like a caseworker looking for childcare for me, which was amazing. And so they managed to connect me with somebody actually in one of the Jewish communities near Bondi, and they had a house that was kind of empty. And so I sort of stayed there, but for about a week or two, I was homeless, you know, and it was a very strange experience because I didn't grow up in the kind of lifestyle where you would expect that to happen. You know, I had a loving family, I had a good education, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a wake up.
Was that rock bottom, or when was rock bottom?
I would say that was one of a few. Yeah, there was a few. Because I got evicted from my home first to be couch surfing. That was one.
Yes.
I'd say separating from my partner when my son was very young. That was another. Having a lot of stress during my pregnancy. So my birth was affected, and his birth weight was affected by the stress during my pregnancy. So that first couple of weeks when he was in the neonatal intensive care, basically because of my living situation and my lack of health, you know, that was really terrifying. So there's lots of moments that led up, but I think that was probably the biggest, and that was the moment where things changed.
So what did change look like for you in that moment? So you're there, you're in sort of near Bondi or whatever it was, in a house that at least it's a temporary accommodation, I'm assuming, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, kind of thing.
At that point, did you say, things have got to change, or when was it, do you think?
Yeah, that was really scary. To not
Mm.
have a home for me was just so scary with a baby. No money. I just felt so powerless, which is a big, important step actually in understanding addiction, I believe, is that when you recognize you are powerless against your habit, when you say, okay, well, I'm doing this even though it's detrimental, even though, and I keep thinking things will change, but I'm doing the same thing over and over, which I hear a little bit of in that message that you receive from your listener as well. And so it's a very brave and courageous step to accept I can't do anything. I'm helpless. And it doesn't mean you can't take action.
Mm.
It means that you can take action from that moment on, but different action. You're going to do something different because you recognize that the things you have been doing are not working. And that's powerful.
Absolutely. So you attended is it the 12-step program, the five, how many?
Yeah.
So
So what
yeah.
happened was I had two family members who sort of understood. One was a therapist and one was an ex-addict himself and a psych nurse, actually. And they both visited me and they both kind of confronted me. They kind of intervened. And then my parents got on the case and tried to organize a rehab for me. But because I had a young child, that didn't really exist to have mother. There are now, I think, one or two in Sydney, but at that time there were no rehabs you could go with your child. So I never forget the interview at this rehab. And they said, look, you've actually done incredibly well considering what you've been through. You're doing amazing. But coming here with your child, not with you, would completely offset anything we can do for you. So go to meetings, get some therapy, and get a job, like set yourself up for success. And gave me really good advice, which was just, you're on the right path, keep going, and that was pretty awesome. And those first few weeks of overcoming an addiction are really hard. And I would highly recommend that if you are anticipating that or expecting to go through that, that you really shore up the bases. You make sure you have supports. 12-step programs, there's nothing like them, in my opinion. Absolutely incredible. And by that, I mean Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous.
Yeah.
Amazing, because you have a community and connection are absolutely the key. It's why I do what I do,
Absolutely.
Mm.
Those first few weeks, realizing, okay, this is it. We're just kicking it to the curb. And
Yeah.
I see in movies and things when people come off certain things that they're addicted to, their whole
Yeah.
body is just like physically can convulse,
Yeah.
like it just, everything gets thrown out. So
Yeah.
without having gone to like a rehab center or something like
Yeah.
that, who was there to support you and your child during that time?
I mean, not really anyone, to be
Wow.
honest. I was kind of on my own. I had friends and family supporting me, but no one really that knew what to do. And I think that's why the 12-step and the therapist was so important. And I did get a job. I got a flexible job. I was very lucky, reasonably, and I got a position in a childcare. So I was able to start actually building my life up. But that few weeks, I mean, you don't really sleep either. So that there's this intense level of depletion. Again, you've got adrenal fatigue from surviving, you've got all the depletion and fatigue and adrenal fatigue that comes from having a baby as well and breastfeeding or minding that baby on your own, in my case. And then all of the emotional stress is sudden. I talk about it was as if, and this is a great analogy I heard in one of the meetings I went to, that it's like you've been on a speedboat and you've been outrunning the wave of trauma and emotion and the big feelings you've been trying to avoid. So you've been speeding along on this speedboat, doing everything you can to stay ahead of it. And then the speedboat stops and the back wave just washes over you. And it's completely overwhelming, It was such a roller coaster, just really intense.
You would have come out of that being so strong as a person. Like, I think it's so admirable for the people who, dust themselves off, next chapter, let's go and look at the lessons and look at you now, like inspiring so many, mothers around the globe, just, from your experience. I think that's absolutely amazing. Passion-driven businesses or initiatives are just, I think, so fruitful for our society because,
Yes.
you can hear even from your story and the way in which you so eloquently tell it, like this was not an easy street at all for you.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
gutting. Yeah, it's
like,
gutting.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm like, you could make a movie from there. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is so,
The
like
book's
it's
coming.
yeah. I'm like, when's the book? When's the movie? Yeah.
It's coming.
Are
It's
you going
coming.
to write one or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
started, and
good.
I get
Yeah.
asked a lot. I get asked to tell this story,
Yeah.
and I feel like I don't want to give any false pretenses here. It takes years. I mean, I was in active addiction for 10 or 12 years. So it was, 5 years of intense self-development, continuing, I would say, still in intense self-development, right? I got my black belt last year. I'm now married with 2 children, and I'm a women's martial arts instructor. I'm an educator and a business owner, and you know, and the work continues. I mean, every day, So it's not like, if you want to do incredible things in your life, whether you have addiction or not behind you, the work continues. As you know. And so,
Absolutely.
but you don't change everything all at once, right? You take a little baby step, and you take the help. You humble yourself and you take the help. And I will say that, looking back, as horrible as it was, and as much as even now I get chills when I have a physical sensation when I talk about it, it's still, I would never change it. Like, I'm just ridiculously grateful, which sounds so cliched, but it has made me, it completely made me into a different person in a way. Like, not a different person, but a person able to do different things.
I literally got shivers as you said that. It's so true.
Mm.
Let's circle back to this person. So let's say, obviously, your story and your lessons were probably a little bit more on the call it extreme end, or there was a number of years there, as you mentioned, of addiction and things like that. And that, again, that's why it's so powerful hearing from you, who has been through it all to get to where you are today. For this particular person or other parents out there going, you know what, firstly, I am struggling. This is hard. This is not what they showed me on Instagram when I looked up parenting. This is not it. Like, I am sleep deprived. I'm over it. Call it my husband's not around, or my wife's not around, or my partner, whatever, so, and I feel so alone in this. And yes, I am reaching. I'm reaching for chocolate. I'm, I'm running every day. I mean, people have different addictions, right? I'm not eating. I am eating. I'm drinking. I'm, all the things. And I can't seem to stop with this hamster wheel situation that I've got going on. And it might not be overly excessive, but it is frequent. So every day I probably will have a chocolate bar or whatever, and so what, in that moment where it hasn't quite hit extreme levels, tell us, what is your guidance for those people?
So first, I will just say, if you're reaching for a chocolate bar a day and that is your worst problem, keep reaching for your chocolate bar and give yourself a huge dose of self-compassion that you're going through. Father or mother, you're going through, or carer, you're going through one of the biggest things in your life. I mean, this transition, especially for child bearers, is the biggest physiological, physical, spiritual, emotional, practical, cultural change in your life, bigger than adolescence, bigger than anything. Okay. So depletion and disconnection are sort of the danger areas in the work that I see, the work that I do with women. This is what I see. And a little bit of that is completely typical and completely natural. And just take it easy on yourself, and don't feel like, there's a lot of talk at the moment about a big performance that happened with a pregnant woman. I don't know when this is coming out, this episode, but there's a lot in the news right now about that. And there's two sides of it. One side of it is, what an incredible thing to see a pregnant woman owning her space on stage. And the other side of it is, why are we putting so much pressure on this woman or any other woman to be so incredible when they're in early motherhood and when they're pregnant? And why is it not enough just to be in early motherhood and pregnant? Making small humans into big humans is a huge job. So I would just say, if you're on the lower end of things, give yourself time. Give yourself large lashings of compassion. You will be reparenting. You will be going through your own childhood and playing it out and having reactions that surprise you, having emotions that surprise you. And that's okay. You're not expected to be perfect. It's okay. Soulful parenting doesn't mean perfect parenting. It just means doing your best on the day, So self-compassion, number one. Number two, I guess, along that theme, I talk about 3 C's, which is compassion, connection, calibration. So like if we can stay in a compassionate space, however we do that, it might just mean we need to drink more water and have more contact naps. It's very personal how we do that. How do we stay in a compassionate space? Do we need to be more gentle with ourselves? Do we need to do some 1-minute meditations? Do we need to have a bath once a week? There's things you can do every day, every week, every month to help yourself stay in a gentle space and stay out of that adrenal survival situation, right? Because that's when you're more likely to reach for something to numb out. So how can you keep your equilibrium, whether it's emotional or physical? And then the next is just to be really connected, like as much as possible to those around you. Accept help whenever you can. Don't feel ashamed if things are not perfect and not like you see on Instagram or like you expected, or, most of the time other people understand that and want to help you. And when you allow someone to help you, you do them a great service. You think about how it feels to help another person. Let people in, so connection, big, big key. And calibration is really about actually how can you be aligned in a bigger sense with something for yourself, with your own purpose beyond parenthood. How can you have a little bit of time to socialize, a little bit of time to read a book, or as they get older, time to focus on your bigger projects, your next career, your next course of study, your communities? How do you calibrate so that you've got time and space for that? And that's sort of in a nutshell. But I think that the biggest thing I want to say is just you aren't broken if these things are happening. They're all too common and we need to normalize it. And the temptation, I think, is when you have a big change in your life, like parenthood, that you think you need to change everything at once. You think that the house now needs to be perfect. You need to be in the best of health. You need to have everything locked down and humming along like a machine. You need to look your best. Everything needs to be a certain way. That is not how things work. And similarly, if you're feeling addiction creeping in, you might feel like you need to make big changes. I would say it's the opposite is true. Let's start with the small things. And in the program that I run with women, we start with rest, nutrition, mindfulness and mental health. We start with the basics. So always just change one small thing and just start where you are. Start from where you're at and just go slowly. Just don't rush. It doesn't have to be fast. So that's and just find the help you need, whatever that looks like.
I love that. No, very well said. I ask all of our guests this final question. So how has parenthood changed you as a person?
It's such a big question. I think the first thing I will say is immensely. And it's 100% made me, because it's been so challenging, because I've had 3 different types of births. And I've had 1 child as a single and, 2 children are married, and like all these different circumstances. I think overall, it's just cracked me wide open. It's cracked me open and allowed me to kind of remake myself in a different way. And I love that opportunity. I often say parenthood is the best self-development opportunity of your life, and that's where I love to kind of hang out with people in that space.
Oh, absolutely. How can people find out more about you and your work?
Sure. So the best way to get in touch with me is to find me on Instagram or Facebook at Soul Mama Hub, SOULMAMAHUB, or just alenaturley.com, my name, alenaturley.com.
Perfect. I'll pop those details in the episode notes. Thank you so much, Alena. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting. So thanks for coming on.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you very much.